living la vida low carb. This show is changing lives. We talking about your diet, trying to get you feeling right. Cut up them avocados, fry some eggs, time to explore the longest running health podcast, hosted by Jimmy Moore. Time to give up the crappy garbage, we're getting into ketosis. Every day is a new step to your goal, yeah, you're getting closer. Motivated and focused, don't stop, just go. Time to get inspiration from the Living La Vida Low Carb Show. Hey, the livinglowcarbshow.com.
Guys, that right there is Pauline Cox. You can go check her out over on Instagram, so_and_arrow, so SOWANDARROW with an underscore at the end. Did somebody else have so and arrow? Is that why you did the underscore? I know she was drunk when she made her username. She was so and arrow underscore. I'm just, yes, high on ketones.
Jimmy, I was high on ketones.
So yes, exactly. So she's a nutritionist there in the UK, Bristol specifically, and integrative medicine. You've authored, you own a gluten-free health store. You've just done a lot of things in the realm of health, and you're here today because I put out this call, or I put out a call to you, and I was like, hey, I love the work you're doing. What can I talk about with you? And you're like, oh, I'm into the role ketones play in so many aspects of brain health, mood. And I'm like, that is my jam right now. I'm really into that aspect of the ketogenic diet, of exogenous ketones and esters and all the things. And so real excited to have you on today. But why don't we start with, who are you? Where'd you come from? How did you get interested in ketones to begin with?
Well, I started my career many, many years ago now as a physiotherapist, or a physical therapist, as you guys say over in America. And I found myself getting increasingly frustrated with the number of individuals coming to my practice with the same symptoms and the same issues, and me doing the same things, interventions using manual therapies. And I then came across the fantastic work of Dr. Terry Wall, who you'll probably be very aware of, and she has MS, and as a physical therapist I had a great interest in MS, and I just got really interested in her work. And then I went over to one of her conferences, or to a functional medicine symposium, and was blown away actually by the research around nutrition and mitochondrial health, and it just really inspired me to have a complete change of career. So I went on and studied for a master's in nutrition, and from there my obsession with understanding all of the different elements to, you know, how nutrition can have such a powerful impact on our physical health, our mental health, and how it can essentially reverse chronic illness. And it really inspired an entire different pathway.
Absolutely. And by the way, guys, Terry Walls is amazing. WAHLS. Go look up her TED Talk she did. I think it was TED Talk Iowa City. This has been many years ago. I've known her since the paleo days, when I was actually there before keto was a thing. She was out there, and yeah, Minding Your Mitochondria was the name of her. It actually got a label on it of long before they'd started putting misinformation on videos and deleting them. They slapped her with one on her video, and they like blur across it. I'm like, come on. She's just sharing her story. How is her story misinformation? It's what happened to her.
Absolutely. Well, ironically, she was told by the MS Society at that time that she was irresponsible and giving people false hope, and she's now hailed as a hero in that kind of field. And you know, and she was such a trailblazer. You know, she just kept going, and you know, now she has a complete different sort of stance with these individuals. But it was really interesting how much criticism she received at the time for, you know, really opening this pathway to what you eat can impact your well, what was seen as something that could never be reversed, and you know, it was hailed as
and now she does amazing research. Thing, she likes a lot more vegetables than Jimmy Moore does, but I trying to get nutrients in the body for the purposes of her brain health and making sure that MS stays under control. But you would never know she was in a wheelchair with looking at her now. She now like bicycles, like almost competitively. It's amazing the turnaround.
Yes, absolutely. Incredible transformation. And that really is it's a great example of how powerful choosing the right path, because, you know, as you said, it's not for everyone. The amount of vegetables she eats wouldn't be for everyone, but it's helped to restore her mitochondrial health and restore her health from being in a recliner wheelchair, where she was really starting to lose her, not just her physical functionality, but, you know, the dexterity in her hand. She knew that her cognitive function was likely to be next. And she's now cycling 18 miles a day. She's really transformed her health, and what a radical example of someone who can, and what I love about it as well, Jimmy, is it's so grounded in science. It's not some fringe science concept. This is what she does is incredibly robust science. So it's great to have that kind of clinical research on food, because it's rare to have.
Yes, because nobody wants to pay for it. You know, there's not a green vegetable lobby out there. Give us, you know, there could be. and animal food. There's a little bit of the red meat. I guess the cattle ranchers, they do pay for some studies, but it's very, very few and far between. But like, look, you were talking about how a lot of the things she was talking about in her work now becoming kind of true. I've been at this game now 17 years, and I've seen all the ups, downs, in betweens of low carb diets, ketogenic diets over that time. It is amazing. When I first came online, Pauline, this was 2005, they were all harping on the high protein aspect of low carb diets. And now look in our culture around the world now, oh, protein first and must get your protein. And it's like, wow, that is quite the juxtaposition from what we had just 17 years ago.
Yeah, I mean, I'm quite looking forward to the day when we're looking at carbohydrates in the same way, where, do you remember the days when we were telling everyone to eat their carbs first, and, you know, and wow, what were we thinking? I don't know.
I will tell you, in the culture,
but, you know,
I think cutting carbs has become just as much nomenclature as cutting your fat was in the like 80s and 90s. I think the new cutting your fat is cutting carbs, because I even see it in cultural references when I watch movies. I'm Netflixing and chilling and I'm watching a movie or watching some TV shows. They're mentioning, oh, I got to cut my carbs. And it's amazing to me, because I remember the day when cutting carbs and, oh my gosh, you're like a vampire. And now it's just become a part of our culture, thanks to kind of paleo, not that that was low carb per se, but it was lower in carbs. And of course, keto, and now carnivores, no carbs. So it's like you've had all these food trends that at least make people mindful of the impact that those carbs are having on them.
Yes, absolutely. And I'm hoping that we get to the point where we start looking at the therapeutic approach to using restrictive carbs or lower carbs to be able to improve the function of the aging brain, for example, or the insulin resistant brain, or even Alzheimer's. Because, you know, when we really study how food not just perpetuates these chronic illnesses, but can be used to reverse them and prevent them, that's when things can really get exciting. And there's so much research to sort of back up these concepts, but again, it's certainly not mainstream. I remember
way back in like 2007, I had a neurosurgeon on, Dr. Larry McCleary. Yes, my memory is good because of ketones. But Dr. McCleary had a great book called The Brain Health Solution, and he dropped the bomb on me baby that day when he said, you know, Jimmy, in research circles, they refer to Alzheimer's disease as another form of diabetes. They like to put it as type 3 diabetes. It was so funny because when he mentioned that, I'm like, whoa. But like, I now hear everybody like, wow, have you heard that Alzheimer's type 3 diabetes? And it's amazing how long it takes to get to the mainstream of public thought, but it's here now.
Yeah. Absolutely. And there's, taking that even a step further, you know, there's this kind of hypo-metabolic state in the brain where it can happen years and years and years before we see any kind of clinical manifestation of neurodegenerative sort of symptoms from Alzheimer's or any other, even in insulin resistance, pre-diabetes, diabetics, we see this hypometabolic state in the brain where glucose might be elevated in the blood, but it's not being used by the neurons in the brain. And this is what I love about ketones. You know, there's this really interesting, and I'll try and keep it relatively simple, guys, because I know there'll be a lot of you out there who have a great deal of knowledge in this area, and there'll be some who it's quite a new concept to. But ketones essentially are the derivative of fat breakdown, and they're an alternative source of fuel for the brain and the rest of the body
preferred
than
fuel
glucose,
source.
for example.
The brain would rather run on ketones and not glucose.
Completely. The brain tends to use glucose because it's what the majority of people fuel themselves with. But absolutely, Jimmy, you're right. It's the preferred source of fuel for the brain. And there's this very interesting interplay with the brain and fuel. So with glucose, you have an on-demand service, if you like. So the more the brain demands and wants the fuel of glucose, the more it will use. Whereas ketones, if you have high circulating levels of ketones in the blood, they get pushed into the brain. So unless the brain cells are demanding glucose, then you're not going to be able to, the brain won't utilize the glucose if you have this insulin resistant state in the brain. But essentially what that means is your neurons, if they're not adequately using glucose, and that's the only source of fuel you're giving your brain, then you start to get this state of potential lack of memory or brain fog or sort of depressive state.
The sugar coma after you've had a big sugary meal. You know, you guys know, you've been there where you're just like, you're zoned out because your brain is literally over carbohydrated, over sugared, and it's not meant to be that way.
Yeah. Absolutely. And we get this state where we have kind of become these chronic carb consumers, and so the body becomes just less efficient at getting that glucose into the cells. So, you know, we're getting more and more blood glucose circulating, the insulin levels get higher, and that really starts to block our body's ability to use this amazing source of fuel, which are ketones, and it blocks us becoming fat burners, which, you know, naturally we are fat burners, but then we lose that amazing machinery that we can be accessing and using. And, you know, then we start to get all sorts of chronic symptoms from, you know, increasing blood sugars, which can be very damaging to our body, to our blood system, to our cardiovascular system, to, you know, our nervous system. So it becomes this.
What amazes me is when people fuel themselves, Paulina, it's amazing. They think they're just fueling like their stomach and then it kind of sends nutrients to the body, but you're directly impacting your brain, partly because what you feed your gut microbiome, there's this gut-brain axis, and people put that connection that they call the gut the second brain. And if you ever look at pictures, go look up on a search engine when we're done with this interview, go look up Google Images or whatever, and you'll see what the gut looks like. It looks like a brain. It's amazing.
Yes. Yeah, absolutely. Well, it has its own little brain in there, doesn't it? And this direct access that we have from our gut to our brain and our brain to our gut, you know, you're absolutely right. What we eat influences not just the microbiome, but that direct communication via the vagus nerve, via this super highway up to the brain. And also what we don't eat has this impact on our brain, because when we're in a fasted state, and you know, Jimmy, I think this is one of the things that anyone and everyone can start to access, is the body's natural ability to burn its own body fat as a source of fuel. And this, I just think this is something that we could all start to tap into. And it doesn't take a great deal of effort. You know, there's about 900 calories worth of glycogen stored in our liver. And once we've cleared that out, we can start to use our own body fat for fuel. And so, you know, a simple fast overnight, if we stopped eating at about 6 o'clock in the evening and fasted for 14, 15 hours, then we are, even if it's a mild state, we're starting to get into ketosis. And this is where we're starting to get these ketones circulating in the blood. The ketones are wonderful at passing through the blood-brain barrier. And that's when these neurons that are a bit, you know, insulin resistant, that aren't great at accessing glucose, start to wake up. And this is why MCT and ketones, the ketogenic diet, can be great for those with neurodegenerative conditions like Alzheimer's, or those with insulin resistant states like
and those
diabetes
people
or diabetes.
need to get their GKI, glucose ketone index, at a certain level, and much more so than just general health. If you've got a traumatic brain injury, you've got degenerative types of diseases, just anything where the brain is being affected, the higher your ketones, the lower your glucose. And look, they work hand in hand. If you get ketone bodies up in the body, guess what? You have a reciprocal blood glucose decrease, and vice versa. When you can get your glucose down into a healthy range, I'm going to try to translate into your numbers to like 4. That's a really like low, good, low, solid, healthy number. You should be able to get ketones pretty darn close to 2, 3, 4 if you're brand new to this.
Absolutely. And I love the fact that you pointed out different health conditions, because really the ketogenic diet, ketosis is just a metabolic state. You know, it's nothing more than that. And we can dip in and out of it. It really depends on what we're looking to achieve. Are we looking for weight loss? Are we looking to optimize cognitive function, improve memory, improve a traumatic brain injury? Is it someone with epilepsy or Alzheimer's? You know, there are different rationale for taking different approaches. Someone might take a low carb approach and add in MCT, because when we add in coconut oil, for example, we're introducing these medium chain triglycerides into our gut that goes straight to the liver, and then we're introducing these ketones. Regardless of whether you have blood sugar circulating, the brain will still use those ketones for fuel, because it will preferentially choose ketones over glucose when they're both present. So you know, it really does depend on what your health outcome is and what your current health situation is as to how you can take advantage of ketones.
And quite frankly, there are parts of the body that are still glucose dependent, meaning you need glucose. Of course, a lot of the dietitians, your fellow kind of nutrition people in the mainstream, they would say, well, see, this is evidence for why you need to eat carbohydrates in like 130 grams. And like, they don't realize there's other ways the body is sophisticated at using the fats and proteins that you eat to make ketone bodies, this little gluconeogenesis word that you might have heard floating around out there, you guys. And it's a thing, and it's demand driven. When the body needs it, it makes it, it takes care of you, and you could eat all meat all the time and pretty much get all the glucose your body needs.
Absolutely. And, you know, it really is about balance, isn't it, Jimmy? You know, I think you get those really die-hard individuals who are constantly monitoring ketone levels, and they might be peeing on sticks regularly or breathing into. I'm not really into measuring ketones. I feel ketosis, and I know when I'm in ketosis because I have that. Yeah, absolutely. The ketone breath, but you get that clarity of thought. You don't get the hunger. You know, you can just keep going until 4 or 5 o'clock, and you kind of forget about food, and then you're like, oh yeah, I should eat something now. Your body adapts how it should do because you're metabolically flexible, and that really is the beauty of being a fat burner over a sugar burner. Is that you can just switch as and when you need to. You know, your body is looking for food. You might get that little spike in hunger initially, but then it goes, and your body's like, the ketones are coming, and you just start burning your own body fat. And, you know, when you enjoy this way of life, I think it's one of the greatest gifts, is not being a slave to your metabolism.
Oh, the food freedom was the first thing I noticed, along with the clarity of mind, mood stabilization. Like I often joke with people, Pauline, that if I never lost another pound, that I had this brain I have right now, I would take it all day, every day.
Yes. Absolutely. Oh, I love that. It's so true, isn't it? You just, when you have the clarity of thought, when you have the memory, and it's also seeing life in full color, because when your brain gets the nutrients it needs, and when you have that clarity of thought, it's just such a beautiful thing. It really is. And, you know, I feel like if people knew how to feed their brain correctly and fuel their body correctly, there'd be a great deal less anxiety and you know, issues with mental health, if we just got that
Yeah, I just
foundational
had a
aspect
tragedy happen
correct.
just down the road from me here on my street, 5 doors down. This guy killed his wife and then shot himself. And the first thing you think of is, wow, what a
Wow.
travesty. But then you think, how can this happen? And my brain goes there. I wonder how the diet was. I wonder if the mental state could have been calmed down if he was eating more nutritious foods. Now, people have mental health issues beyond their nutrition. Some of it's genetic, but I think a lot of those even tendencies genetic could be expressed epigenetically in a more positive way if they were feeding themselves well and doing some lifestyle things.
Keto can be hard. Tabulating, measuring, baking, taking 3 months to perfect one recipe, and to mixed reviews.
Did something die in here? Oh, I think it moved.
And by that point, you give up your diet, find a dark corner, and stuff yourself with sugar, carbs, and regret.
This, isn't what it looks like.
Well, this is where Keto Chow saves the day. The easiest, tastiest, ketoist meal replacement on the market.
It's like ice cream melted in my mouth.
Yes, but melted ice cream with all the protein, nutrients, vitamins, and electrolytes your body needs.
Oh, that's cool.
And with 3 starter kits, each with restaurant tips, keto food guides, and a ton of flavors to try, your taste buds and your waistline will thank you.
Thank you.
So grab your starter kit today at jimmylovesketochow.com.
It's so easy.
Keto Chow. Make keto easy.
Really, when we get our nutrition correct, that's when we get better sleep. And sleep is absolutely key for our mental health. You know, I know a great deal of people I'm working with at the moment come to me and their main presenting complaint is, I can't sleep. And when you really start to break everything down and look at the diet, the lifestyle habits, the gut health, you know, they're all so interconnected. And I think the problem with the way we look at medicine these days, it's so fragmented. We look at a symptom coming from the gut and we treat the gut, and we look at a symptom, a migraine, and we treat the migraine. Whereas when we really start to see that, you know, everything in the body is interconnected, including the blood circulating these amazing ketones, we can really get back to basics and, you know, see that just because we're having mental health issues, it doesn't mean it's not coming from the gut, or it doesn't mean it's not coming from potentially something that's missing from a lack of absorption from the gut. There are, I mean, obviously there are multiple factors involved with mental health, but getting the foundations right first at least gives the brain a fighting chance to.
Our culture has so ruined
best.
us, though, Pauline, because they put all the focus on, okay, you go on a diet and it's to lose weight. And it's like, that's it. Like, no other ramifications. I guess there's an extension of, if you lose weight, you get healthy. I think that's backwards. I think you eat and you live your life in such a way, and you take vitamins and do all the things that are your health modalities to get healthy. Weight loss is just a side effect of that. But if we put the emphasis on health, I guess it's not as sexy as, oh, you lost 12 stone, you know, and that's easier to sell to people than, oh, you're going to lower your A1C from 7.2 to 5.4, and you're going to be able to come off your diabetes medications. Maybe that sells to some people, but they'd rather lose the weight than get healthy.
Yes, yeah, I completely agree. And I think it's only when you really start to recognize how good feeling healthy actually feels that it's life-changing. And I think at that point you start to let go a little bit of the control that a lot of people feel around looking a certain way and fitting into a certain kind of box, and it becomes more about you know, how do I feel today, and what does my life, what's my experience of life with myself, the relationship I have with myself, with my food, with the world around me, and that really comes back to becoming connected with you and becoming connected to the world around
I
you
often
as well.
wonder what my university experience would have been like back 30 years ago when I was in college in a ketogenic state. Like, I would have run circles. I could go back now and run circles around most of those kids. So it's amazing. Like, it's powerful. And yet, how do you convince clients of the brain health when all they want to do is lose weight? All they want to do is be out of pain. You know, those things are important to them, and you want to honor that. But how do you convince them of the brain health? It's not something that a lot of people, I guess, aspire for. I do. I love my brain health. I love how the brain works, the memory, like all the aspects of that, which is why I constantly, it's why when you said you wanted to talk about this today, I'm like, yes, I want to talk about that. How do you convince people that aren't interested in it to get interested in it?
You know, I personally think that with brain health, it's only something that you maybe value when you start to lose. Because again, a lot of the individuals I work with come to me when they start losing health or a bit further down the line. And I think that can be quite a scary situation. You know, you really start to feel like, gosh, I'm losing that sharpness, or, you know, things that used to just come to me are going.
Yes.
Your memory might be the first thing. And then, you know, that kind of, you start losing words, or that fear of, wow, is this the beginning of some sort of dementia or neurodegenerative kind of condition? And so I think it's something that people think about later, like that it's going to happen to them much later in life. Now, I'm like you, Jimmy. I love to think about how I can optimize my brain. I want to be, you know, sharp. I'm in my 40s now, and decade on decade, I just want that sharpness to keep coming. And so I love learning about what are the things that can give my brain the edge. How can I keep getting more into this amazing, you know, computer inside our head, and how can I look after it for as long as I possibly can, so that when I get to 90, 95, 100, it's still sharp and I'm still learning. I'm still able to converse with those around me.
I hate that phrase, age-related disease, because they end like Alzheimer's and dementia and some of these other things that you start to lose your faculties about you. The American president is a fine example of that. Unfortunately, it's true. So it's where we are. And so, but it's not age related. I think it's nutrition and lifestyle related, and how you treated yourself, and have you done, I don't want to ask you some of the things that you do to preserve your brain health, but like, let's stop calling it age related disease. It's nutrition and lifestyle related.
Yes. Absolutely. I couldn't agree with you more. You know, there are genetic predispositions. However, we absolutely know that long before, as we mentioned at the beginning, long before there's any clinical manifestation of Alzheimer's or dementia, there are these states of hypometabolism, so that the brain cells are not able to use glucose in the same way. So that brain cell then starts to die. It essentially it almost becomes in a hibernated state. Now, what's really interesting is those neurons can still use ketones. So when individuals with Alzheimer's or insulin resistance, and there's areas of insulin resistance, particularly in the brain, and you see this in women with polycystic ovarian syndrome, you see this in pre-diabetics, when they're given ketones, exogenous ketones or MCT, it changes their cognitive function. And this is why really ketones could be a therapeutic approach to neurodegenerative conditions, but it's not currently seen as a therapeutic approach. And it really is a shame, because it could be not just for
I remember being at a conference with a bunch of doctors, and they were all nerdy and everything. And they had a speaker talk about ketones, and he said, if I was having a heart attack, I would want them to pump ketones directly into my heart. And I was, whoa. Like, it just hammered home the therapeutic effects of this. Not that it would necessarily be a miracle or anything, because if it was truly that miraculous, they would have already figured out a way to implement it. But I think about things like cancer or diseases that in certain applications for certain circumstances, ketone bodies would be a godsend.
Absolutely. Well, Mary Newport wrote a fabulous book. I'm sure you're aware of her work, and her husband.
I was the one that actually got her
Alzheimer's
to start putting coconut oil in her husband's oatmeal. She was feeding him, and I interviewed her on my podcast.
Wow.
And wow, I never thought about adding coconut oil as a MCT precursor. Well, I always thought that was cool. She said I was the one that helped her kind of put that on her radar screen.
Well, that was a genius move. It really was, because she then recognized the benefit of using the full spectrum fats in coconut as well as the MCT. And from that research, she was able to really measure the spike in ketones and how using it with the coconut oil kept the baseline levels of ketones higher for longer, rather than the kind of 90-minute spike and then the big drop. So, you know, she then went on to really research in detail how, yes, MCT oil is fantastic, but when used with coconut oil, particularly when you're looking at improving the brain function, you get the benefits of the longer chains as well, which can help support things like the astrocytes within the brain. So, you know, we all know quite a lot about MCT as, you know, an oil we put in our coffee, but actually coconut as a whole food is incredibly rich in nutrients, from the medium chains to the long chains as well, and they all play their role in supporting brain health.
And that's why you don't hear about too many unhealthy
levels.
people along the equator, where there are lots of coconuts. And I remember cruises before where you get to go to the Bahamas and in the different parts of the Caribbean, and they're yeah, man, you want some coconut, man? And whole one there you can like drink out of and then crack it open and eat the meat out of. It's amazing. It's kind of a superfood that's underrated.
Yes, and it gets such a bad name. You know, it frustrates me when you hear nutritionists and dietitians talking about, you know, it's high in saturated fat and it's bad for you. And, you know, there's still a lot of bad science related to coconut, and you know, coconut will increase your cholesterol. Coconut is very rich in MCT, the medium chain triglycerides. About 60% of coconut fat, of the a special type of saturated fat called medium chain triglycerides, which I know you'll know a lot about, Jimmy. But for those of you who are listening in, medium chain triglycerides are a very important part of the coconut that gives it these wonderful health benefits. And rather than being digested like some of the longer chain fats are, it goes via the portal vein straight to the liver, where it's converted into ketones and gives you this instant access of ketones. So it's a great way of increasing your baseline of ketones without, you know, having to necessarily fast or go low carb. If that's not your lifestyle choice at the moment, you can increase your baseline ketone levels by eating certain foods and adding certain oils like MCT oil, or increasing your coconut consumption, which is what Mary Newport did.
Yes,
with,
and actually I convinced her to lower the carbs, not to add the coconut. That's what it was. So she came on the show. She said, I put coconut oil on his oatmeal. I said, get rid of the oatmeal, still oil, and eggs, and see what happens. That's what it was. I knew there was something. That's right. So she already was doing the coconut oil and was well into researching that, but she didn't make 2 and 2 with the carbohydrate aspect. So I got her to cut the oatmeal out, and that's when he started having some of the improvements. Unfortunately, he has passed away, her husband. He had the very early onset. Yeah. It wasn't age related. It was very genetic related.
It was. Yeah. But he saw some incredible improvements. I mean, he really did. When particularly when he had the ketone esters, that was when he really saw incredible, to the point where he was not allowed to enter certain trials because he was considered too far clinically down the road. And then as he had these huge improvements when he started using MCT and coconut oil and the ketone esters. And sadly, he saw a huge decline when he went on to one of the trials, which the drug actually was found to worsen his condition. So that was a very sad situation. But, you know, it was very interesting. For those of you who are interested in learning more about Alzheimer's and ketones, Dr. Mary Newport's book, I think it's called The Miracle of Ketones, and her website, coconutketones.com, is her website. So lots of great resources on there for free. But yeah, I have tried, by the way, the ketone esters. Ugh. So gross. This little I got some in there actually, and I'll every once in a while just pop one. But I've actually done some tests in the midst of, and I'll test
ketones every 15 minutes to see how rapid the rise is. And I'll start at like 0.8, and then 15 minutes later, it'll be 1.4. 30 minutes later, it'll be 2.7. 45 minutes later, it'll be like 3. It just keeps going high, high, high. And in the meantime, my brain is just going crazy. I literally feel like flames are coming out the top of my head. And man, it's like jet fuel ketone. Like if I was going to go into a test where I needed a recall, I'd be like chugging that stuff and be like, all right, let's go. Like,
let's do this. I mean, it really is. It's quite incredible. I personally don't take ketone salts, ketone esters. I take MCT oil, and I'll take that in the morning with my coffee. But I think, and I'm sure you agree with this, Jimmy, that the longer you do this lifestyle, the longer you and give yourself that time to adapt, to go low carb, then to start intermittent fasting, then to do longer fasts, and then to, you know, really commit to it and do it in a way where you're not kind of, I'll take the pizza on the weekend and I'll get back on it on Monday. For me, it's like smoking. I'm not a smoker, and it's same with gluten and grains. I don't eat gluten or grains. They're just not part of my life. And so if I'm having a cheat day, so to speak, it'll just be, you know, a higher carb bar of chocolate or something. It's not, I still wouldn't go for the Domino's or the McDonald's. And so when you've done this for a while, you do find that your baseline ketones become so much more robust. And it's that sort of, it's like having a campfire where when you start out, it's very easy for that fire to go out. And then as, you know, that fire becomes more kind of set in over time, we're talking months, maybe 12 months down the line, your physiology is so fat adapted that you can skip in and out. And I don't mean, you know, go for the McDonald's and come back again. I mean that you can have those days where you're having higher carbs, you know, 70, 80 grams, and then you're going back to your 30, 40 grams or 20, whatever, you know, whatever level that individual's at. But it allows for that metabolic flexibility, which is one of the gifts that you get when you're in this fat burning state, and this, your fat burning machinery.
What's amazing to me is that when people first start on a ketogenic diet, you can see really high numbers. And when I say really high, not ketoacidosis really high, but nutrition, you could see a 5, 6. I think the highest I ever saw without any exogenous ketones or ketone esters was a 7.2. And it was very early on when I was getting keto adapted. This is almost 10 years ago now. And I popped that 7.2 and I was in 5, 6. And I was like, well, dang, I can have a piece of chocolate cake and still be in ketosis. And so it's amazing because the body's trying to get used to using this new fuel source. Like, they freak out, number one, oh my gosh, this is so high at 3. And I'm like, you're not high. Ketoacidosis is 20. No. Plus blood sugar would just be ungodly high, 15 plus in yours at like 250 milligrams per deciliter. Here, it has to be just horrible. That's not the same metabolic state. And so, no. And you're not going to get into ketoacidosis doing fasting anyway, you know, unless you have type 1 diabetes. I did find this out talking to Dr. Adam Nally. He's had a couple of patients that were type 2 diabetics that got ketoacidosis because they got dehydrated. So you've got to stay well hydrated and well electrolyted and all of that. But the point is, when you first start, you might see higher ketones as the body's kind of in flux trying to figure out what this is. Then over time, you actually, once you become a keto adapted, fat adapted body, even if you go in and out of ketosis, you're going to see lower levels of ketones. You know, I don't.
Absolutely. Yeah. And people, this is why, Jimmy, I'm not a fan of measuring and monitoring consistently, because A, it becomes a little bit obsessive, and B, you know, particularly individuals who exercise quite vigorously, they're using those ketones, you know, you just become very efficient. So your baseline ketones, you're peeing on a stick, or your breath measurements of ketones or blood measurements, however you're choosing to do it, might show very low levels of ketones because you're so efficient at utilizing
as you make them, you utilize them. Isn't that like what I mean? I joked one time at a conference, oh yeah, I want zero if I test for ketones. I want to show zero because that means I'm making and I'm using. Out on that, he's like, you can't technically have zero, Jimmy. I'm like, well, that I suppose if you're making and utilizing simultaneously, it would be zero. It would be a wash. But that's why over time, maybe you have lower levels. I have people write me, it's only 0.6. Yes. I'm like, why are you bitching? Like, you're in ketosis.
You tired of playing the mask game? Me too. That's why I wanted to tell you about the Unmask. This is a breathable, completely breathable. It covers, you can't even see that it's breathable, but it's breathable. Whether you're going on a plane, having to go into a store and wearing this thing, playthemaskgame.com is how you can get this mask. They come in all kinds of colors and everything. In fact, right there, you can see right through it what it is, but when you're wearing it, it does not look like it's anything different, but it's breathable, baby. Playthemaskgame.com.
And that's why it's really nice to gauge your ketogenicity, if you like, or how awesome your body is at adapting to this lifestyle via how you feel, you know, your mental clarity, your hunger. I think hunger's a really great indicator. You know, when you know, I think a lot of people ask me, how do you know when you're in ketosis? You kind of just know because you know, A, you're not hungry, B, you're not thinking about food, you have great clarity of thought, you have great energy, and you just feel, and sometimes you go to sort of 6-7 o'clock in the evening and you're like, well, now I'm past hunger, I'm not even remotely interested now, because you're beyond it and you know that your body's just chowing down on whatever fat it's got, you know, hidden around you somewhere. It's so wonderful to think that we are these, essentially we're walking refrigerators carrying our food sources around.
And that's of even a lean person. You know, when we hear about like eating fat on your body, it's obvious when somebody has overweight or obesity on them. But even someone who's super lean, you know, the lean male athletes, they're what, 5-6% body fat. Even females will have what, 15 to 17% body fat. You got food on your body to eat. So it is amazing how, wow, you're starving. I'm like, no, I'm eating my body fat, which is a byproduct.
Yes, and your brain is getting this feast of ketones, which really I think the ketogenic diet, firstly, I think it gets a bad rap. And secondly, I think more and more people are starting to understand the weight kind of benefits, but still have no idea of the neuro benefits of this way of life and how really incredible it can be. It's so anti-inflammatory. Ketones are antioxidants. They promote neurogenesis. I mean, really, there's all of these wonderful benefits.
And boost your immune system, which helps your total health. Yes, absolutely. They're good for insulin sensitivity. They're good for lowering glucose. They really are. You know, if you could bottle ketones and the big pharma could take it and create some sort of medication. I'm surprised we haven't already seen them take at least some of the BHB salt technology, the ketone, exogenous ketones, and even some of the ketone esters, and try to put them in a pill form and say, oh, wow, we have a fat burning pill. And, you know, that's kind of been disheartening about the way the exogenous ketones have been promoted publicly. Eat all the carbs you want and get into a state of ketosis and burn fat and lose weight. I'm like, what a horrible message.
Yeah, I agree. I think there's a lot of opportunistic marketing and sales that really bypass the health benefits of low carb and allowing your body to switch in and out of these alternative metabolic states. And, you know, I think it really does. It's congruent with our instant fix society. We like quick fixes. We like to take a pill and then carry on with the foods that we've become dependent on. But actually, as we start to get free from those foods, the real freedom is in the feelings that we get, the life we can experience from knowing that it's really simple to say no. I mean, I work with people with food addictions and all sorts of metabolic disorders, but one thing that consistently comes back after they've made these changes is they didn't realize how addicted they were to these foods. And it's quite a cynical environment, the food manufacturing and big food companies, because they know how addictive their foods are. They're designed to be that way. And sadly, our physiology becomes so excited by these food substances. And, you know, there's even the highly processed foods has this very damaging effect to the neurons within our gut. And these neurons are the neurons that produce the satiety hormones. They tell our body, they tell our brain, I've had enough now, I'm good. And when those become damaged, these processed foods, we eat more and more and more of, and we don't get that switch off anymore. So, you know, it's not that we are inherently greedy or that we inherently have no willpower. It's that we're not designed to eat these sorts of foods that just.
That's why I refer to those kinds of foods as food-like disease agents, because that's literally all they are. They're not food. I wish we could classify like what food is, and then like have a sticker on the things that aren't food that say not food. Not food. There's a lot of not food sold in stores.
Fake food. Yeah, quite absolutely. And just taking it back to real food again, you know, and again, carbs do sometimes gets a bad rap, and you know, not all carbs are equal. A hamburger is not the same as a sweet potato or some butternut squash or zucchini, or you know, these carb-based vegetables. They're not the same. We can't compare them, because fundamentally, as you say, one's kind of fake food when it's highly processed and made with ingredients that we wouldn't even recognize as food. And then you have something that, you know, has a higher carb content, but our body still recognizes it as food and processes it efficiently. If we're not in an insulin resistant state, you know, if we're metabolically functioning really well, then having some potato or some, you know, butternut squash. I don't know if you guys call it butternut squash over there. Do you call it? Yeah. So, you know, these things that are sometimes vilified in the keto community, you know, I have no issue with if you have that kind of metabolic flexibility where you're like, you know, my body can handle a bit of carbs now and again. It's when we're constantly over consuming the carbs and then we get this really insulin resistant
well, and look, as you're healing, you have to test that metabolic flexibility. I will occasionally throw in a sweet potato just to see where I'm at. Like it's still real food, so I don't fret about it. And I'll test blood sugar. And like I've seen over time, Pauline, that it's gotten better. Doesn't go as high at the 1 hour postprandial anymore, where it goes super high. So I know I'm seeing healing happen, even as I'm still dealing with weight and trying to get that off the body. And I've got the little skin tags that tell me I still have insulin resistance. So, you know, you pay attention to the things, but how do you know you're healing unless you push that every once in a while? Plus, it gets out of ketosis so you can get back in.
Absolutely.
That flexibility improves your insulin sensitivity.
Yeah.
It's a good thing.
Yes, absolutely. And, you know, I love that you test your blood glucose levels, because it probably also shows you that if you've had a bad night's sleep, your glucose levels are not so sensitive, your insulin isn't so sensitive. If you maybe mix up some fiber, have a bit of sauerkraut with what you're eating, there are ways that we can still enjoy maybe a little bit more carb in our diet, but we start to understand the various factors that have a big influence, and stress and sleep and you know, even what you're eating with your sweet potato or your you know, your slightly carbier keto bread roll, have, you know, that has a direct influence on. And even, you know, magnesium deficiency is a huge issue for a great deal of individuals. And, you know, there's so many women out there that I work with a lot of women with hormonal issues, and they're super strict with their carbs, and they're really strict with their exercise, and, you know, they are not shifting their body composition at all. And when they start to really look at gut health and nutrient absorption and magnesium levels, that's kind of like the magic missing.
Don't higher insulin levels deplete the body of magnesium. So so if you higher insulin vis-a-vis having some insulin resistance, you know, that's an argument for deal with the insulin resistance by eating ketogenic, but maybe having a high quality magnesium in the meantime, trying to balance it off. Plus the magnesium, if you take it close to bedtime, helps you sleep. So there's so many like crossover things. So why do you need to hire somebody like yourself that can dig into this? I'm sure you nerd out on this all the time.
I do, and particular types of magnesium as well, Jimmy, because magnesium biglycinate is one that can actually cross the blood-brain barrier. Then you have the cheap forms of magnesium, like magnesium
stomach
oxide.
Issues with those. I took magnesium citrate when I first learned you need to take magnesium. Oh, I'll just buy magnesium citrate. I was up pooping my pants all night. Horrible.
But you're absolutely right. When you have a high sugar diet, particularly if you've had, you know, a lot of carbs in your diet, then sugar depletes magnesium, inflammation depletes magnesium, stress depletes magnesium, and then we have very depleted soils. So the food that we actually do consume is often very devoid of these very key minerals. And so we end up in this very depleted magnesium state. And magnesium is a key mineral for the insulin receptors. So unless you have magnesium, you start to develop this insulin resistant state, even if you are low carb and really trying to be in this kind of keto way of life. So we mustn't, you know, ignore, and I know you certainly don't, but we mustn't ignore the importance of nutrient dense foods and the part that, you know, quality nutrients play in the big picture of the journey to health.
I love, by the way, that you said you don't really worry about testing ketones. You just kind of know. And if somebody is brand new, please test for a period of time. So, you know, like I did a whole N=1 experiment in 2012 for 1 year. And I tested morning and night, sometimes every hour on the hour that I was awake. So in that time, I learned what it felt like when I was in really like deep ketosis. But there's this trend now, especially amongst people that try to like buck the trend of keto, and they're like, well, you shouldn't be chasing ketones. And I get what they're saying, and I definitely am in cahoots with that. Ketones are not the ultimate goal, being healthy, feeling all the effects of ketones. So I like that phrase, but I don't like it because it tells people, yes, ketones are important, but you don't really have to pay attention to them. And I think that might send the wrong message. Well, ketosis and I feel good. And I suppose at some point, if they're not actually in ketosis, they're not going to feel good.
No, and I completely agree with you, actually. I think I personally really love the idea of measuring blood sugars. I think that gives you so much information. It gives you an idea of, because everyone responds differently to different foods. Someone can eat, you know, a big fat keto chocolate cake and nothing. Someone else can have that same cake and whoosh, their blood sugars are rocketing, you know. So for me, blood sugar measurements are, I love the continuous blood sugar monitors. I think they're fantastic for really giving you an indication of, well, I'm not stressed at all. No, stress doesn't affect me.
I was on the phone one time when I was wearing the Freestyle Libre, and I was talking to someone, and it was a very distressing call. And I thought, okay, I knew I was getting upset. So I just started, bloop, up 50 points, bloop, up 40 points, bloop, up 70 points. And all I'm doing is just stress. I'm not, in fact, I was in a well-fasted state at the time, and it was just going way sky high. And it was like, holy crap. People don't.
It's so interesting though, isn't it? You know, I don't think people really associate stress with blood sugars, and then people don't understand the impact of stress and weight gain and visceral fat. You know, it really, but when you see the monitor changing, you're like, damn, okay, maybe
I'm going to blow your mind. You ready for this, Pauline? What is stressed
hit me.
Spelled backwards? Stressed. Yes, stressed.
Stressed with the D at the end?
Desserts.
Desserts.
So you got to think about it. When you're stressed, you're eating desserts. That's basically your blood sugar is going to respond in the same way. You can use that, by the way, with your clients. So before we get out of here, this has been a wonderful conversation. I knew it would be. I adore your work. all that you do. And obviously this is a topic I'm very fascinated with. What are some of those things that you do to help your own brain health? You said you're in your 40s, which by the way, you don't look like you're a day over 25, but that's good nutrition as well, right? So what do you do? What are some of the modalities that you implement?
I love fasting. I think fasting is a cheap and a super effective way of protecting the brain, improving insulin sensitivity, and allowing things like brain-derived neurotropic factor, which is like miracle grow for your brain. I love fasting for the brain. I think it's and I don't eat between the hours of 6 p.m. and 1 p.m. the next day, so I give myself a really nice window for fasting. Sleep is really key. I'm a huge fan of supplementing before bed. I take magnesium biglycinate before bed. I take L-theanine, sometimes ashwagandha. I wear a dark mask, face mask, to block any light out, and I have a cool room. I usually have a hot shower before bed to make sure I get really deep sleep, so I'm getting plenty of REM sleep.
Do you track with a tracker, like an Oura?
Sleep. You know, I don't, Jimmy. Again, I'm not great at tracking anything because I'm quite intuitive with my body and what it needs and how it, and I should, and maybe I will one day, but I just don't at the moment, because I know, for example, if I wake up, I don't drink alcohol, but if I wake up feeling hungover, I know that I haven't had adequate sleep. Or maybe I was stressed the day before and needed a bit more minerals, more magnesium. So I do tend to super supplement before I go to bed, particularly if I've had a really busy and long day. So sleep is really key. Omega-3 fatty acids, I'm a huge fan of. Have
you ever tried krill oil?
Intelligent fats. I haven't, no. I mean, I've read good things about krill oil. I've always had high level. I take about 2,000 milligrams of EPA, DHA daily. That, I actually notice, and I say to people, I feel like fish oils are one of the things that you notice, notice when you take them and when you stop, particularly if you're having quite high levels. And all my kids have had from a very young age fish oils, and they're annoyingly smart. Annoyingly smart. So just to summarize, fasting, really good quality sleep, supplements by sort of things like smart fats, essential fatty acids, and then doing things that you love to do, laughter, joy, spending time outdoors. I'm a huge fan of being outdoors first thing in the morning, setting the circadian rhythm, getting light into my eyes. I'm not a sunglasses wearer, so you're really getting that daylight into the eyes first thing in the morning, and then again at lunchtime, and then again at 4:30, 5 o'clock, to really get, absolutely, at least to really, I know it's sort of a curse of our times that we're all at the PCs and screen times, but if we can just help our bodies understand the time of day and getting that body clock set, but also obviously the wonderful benefits of being outdoors anyway. I'm a huge fan of being in nature, cold water swimming, cold water exposure, again, amazing for the brain. And I love being in extreme situations to kind of challenge the body.
This time of the year, the cold water coming through the pipes in my shower in there, it's plenty cold. And I stuck my head under it, and I slowly moved it over, and then I finally went, screw it. And I let it hit my brain almost the entire 15 minutes. I get some of the belly as well, because I'm trying to lower the inflammation there. But the main part is I let it hit my head. And you feel so serene at the end of it. It's amazing to do.
Yeah. And that's actually so good for the blood-brain barrier, improving the integrity of the blood-brain barrier. Because like with the gut, you get leaky gut, you get the same with the blood-brain barrier as well. So
I could talk to you all day, Pauline, but we do have to get out of here. Pauline, her name, go check her out on Instagram, @so_and_. Spell out the word AND. She does have a link tree when you go there, and you can see all the things that she offers this world. She has a book, Primal Living in a Modern World. She has CBD oil, Breaking Up with Sugar ebook and webinar, Healthy Keto Diet and Lifestyle Facebook group. You got it all, girl. So go check her out, you guys. And Pauline, thank you for joining me today on the show as I drop my iPhone.
Jimmy, it's been lovely talking to you. Thank you for having me on.
Get inspiration from the Living La Vida Low Carb Show. Hey, the livinglowcarbshow.com. Woo!